Okay, we're recording. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Wetham, and I am a program administrator at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. And I'd like to introduce my co-facilitator, but he's the real facilitator, Lucas Myers. Lucas, could you just say a few words of introduction?
Yeah, I teach at Lower Columbia College. I'm a tenured faculty member there, and I've been teaching online since about 2012, 2013. Some of that general biology, biology 160, and some of that anatomy, physiology, and then other biology courses as needed. But those are the two main areas I've taught, and also transitioned to online for our college, and we've been doing that at LCC for a while. And so I've been very predominantly in that kind of pre-allied health track, pre-physical therapy. So I'm used to, one, dealing with a lot of the questions and concerns we're seeing in the chat today. So it should be a good conversation. I'm excited to hear from everybody, and I think there'll be some really good solutions that come out of today's meeting.
Lucas, thank you so much. And to everyone who has just joined us, hello and welcome. We are recording. And meanwhile, I'm just letting people in because of the new Zoom security. So, so folks will be, I think, trickling in as we go. So if you haven't had a chance to yet, if you could just write in your biggest concern, question, issue as you transition your face-to-face classroom into a remote learning environment. And Lucas and I are going to skim through these and there, I think there's some questions that we can answer right away, and then there's other ones that will be more sustained. As you are doing that, this is my new favorite joke. Faculty unite together separately in your own homes to try to work together during this very tumultuous time. And today, the rough agenda is to just briefly introduce the notion of why communities of practice. Lucas and I want to uncover questions and problems of practice that we can address in the short term. Like already I'm seeing some questions around transfer that I know we can answer right away. And then also, Lucas and I would like to make a proposal to this group. I'm very aware that in this A&P group, there is not an interest in Labster. And also there are some serious accessibility issues with Labster. And so what Lucas and I would like to propose is that we would build some low stakes, high impact, low tech labs that are aligned with the core learning outcomes for A&P, and that people could build them to be shared so that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So that's our proposed agenda for the day, and then also identify next steps. Like if people would like to do that, if that's useful, then how do we make that go from a great idea to a reality? So before I go any further, I'm just wondering if everyone is cool with this agenda, or if there's something on the agenda that we didn't put on that you would like us to add right now. So I'll give folks a second to just type into the chat or speak, or does this seem okay? Maybe if everybody could give me like a thumbs up, or, oh, Tova says okay. Tim Flake says looks okay. Okay, thank you. All right. And Alyssa said this is an excellent idea. Alyssa works with me often. She knows I need, she knows I need praise. So oh, Ben gave us a thumbs up. Okay, excellent. All right, so we wanted to talk for a second about why communities of practice. And again, I hope this isn't too common sense, but just again, I think there's a lot of tendency in our in higher education and in teaching in general for everybody to think about my class, my students, and then we have a lot of wheel recreation on an individual level. So just this notion that many hands make light work, and this could be a very beautiful thing to share resources, not just for the short term, but also for the long term. And again, I don't think Joe Monroe was able to join us today, but this is something that she has talked about for a long time, that there's certain things where there are just best practices. There's the certain kinds of problems where there's just best practices, like the students aren't reading, so great, reading apprenticeship, there you go. But there's also some kinds of professional development things that happen that we actually don't have best practices for. And so we need to invent new solutions. And COVID-19 seems like it's presenting a lot of challenges where there actually aren't best practice solutions, and we have to invent them. And the best way to do that so that they are of use to as many people and students as possible is that we build them collaboratively. And finally, just finding comfort and solace and inspiration in community. So Lucas, anything that you want to add about communities of practice?
I think those are good. I think it's just this is a great opportunity in the midst of chaos to really develop some good working relationships across the state and develop some good material for our online classes. There's so many publisher companies and different things out there that we can pay for, but to improve accessibility, to create things that are tailored to what we need in this state for our pre-nursing, pre-allied health students. To me, communities of practice is just a great place for us to start. And it just so happens that, an unfortunate thing is occurring to force us to do some of that. But I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel for that work. And I think this is a great place to begin.
Thanks, Lucas. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to offer about, I mean, I'm sure there's people in this group who have used communities of practice before or been part of one. Is there anyone who would like to say anything? And don't worry if you don't feel like it, but I just wanted to offer the mic. Okay, so, and feel free to type into the chat at any time. So the first thing we'd like to do is just uncover the core questions, challenges, problems of practice. And, what questions do you have and how can we help each other with this work? And so, Lucas, I'm wondering if you could start by just, what do you notice in the chat that we could share forward and answer immediately?
Yeah, I was writing down some of the things I was seeing. The big one is transfer to institutions. And when you get when they send their transcript to another institution, there should be no notation of any online lab. We've been doing online A&P for years now, 5, 6, 7 years, and we have no transfer issues because of the online thing. That doesn't show up on a transcript. Now, post COVID-19, maybe all these universities will be like, well, I know you took it online. I doubt we're going to see any of that. And that would be an issue because the way it's put in the transcript, it's no different than a face-to-face class. So we've seen no issues around that. Now, if you were a purely online virtual school, maybe that would create some red flags or something with universities or transfer institutions. But we have had no problems, nor have I heard of any problems around that. So if anybody else has heard that or seen that, that would be good to know. But we've been, we have anywhere from 96 to 150 online A&P students every quarter. So, and I've had very little, I've had no questions or concerns from universities about the labs being online because it doesn't show up as distance ed on the transcript. So that would be one of the main ones that jumped out right away that I would address. Does anybody have anything different on that they've heard or they're still concerned about, or maybe have had issues with regarding transfer to do with the online labs, online part of the class?
We've had some issues at Renton Tech, specifically with Yakima's nursing program, where they have something in there that says specifically that their prerequisites have to have an in-person component. And for that reason, our online classes for MP and bio and everything have always had Saturday labs.
Okay. No, that's good to know. Has that ever been an issue in turn? I mean, I know we've had students go to Yakima. I don't know if they've been distance ed or not. there's no way really for them to investigate that per se, unless they really wanted to dive back, and they'd have to access item numbers and everything. And a lot of that's probably not viewable in terms of a transfer institution. But yeah, no, that's a good point. I haven't seen much of that or any issues with that with students.
Sarah, hi, Sarah. This is Jen. Nice to see you. Hi.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question. Is that the only nursing program you know, or like, is that one specific example that you think is representative of a lot of nursing programs, or is that the one that you've heard about? Does that make sense?
That is the one that we've heard about, and we've gotten the impression that the reason that they might be picky about that is because a lot of students from Yakima are taking online bio at Renton Technical College and driving over 3 times a quarter for those Saturday labs. So I'm not sure if that's the real issue. It's mainly been the dean who's been talking to them about that.
Yeah,
Jen, I can comment on that a little bit.
Please go right ahead.
My name's Andy. I'm the science chair at SCC in Spokane. The SCC nursing program, as well as the WSU nursing program, will not also take online lab courses for their prerequisites. Again, they're not transcripted, but the only way that they can find out is if the student tells them. We have been given notification from both WSU and the SCC nursing programs that for this quarter, that requirement will be waived for students in the application process.
That's good to know.
Yeah, and Andy, thank you for being able to specifically address that. I really appreciate that. And Sarah, thank you for voicing that specific question. One thing that I'm thinking about as we move forward with this is that after COVID-19, the landscape will shift. A lot more people will know what the online experience is like, done well, done poorly, but people will definitely have more flexibility, more fluidity. And the reason I'm bringing this up is the nursing faculty at Highline, the microbiology faculty, reached out to the nursing faculty specifically and said, what are the 3 things that students have to know and be able to do in labs, to be successful? So Highline is redesigning their labs based on what the nursing faculty told them was necessary. So they're just going deeper into those top 3 things. So I think there's ways for us to have deeper, richer conversations around learning outcomes to increase transferability. And I'm excited about that potential. Anything else about transfer? And Heidi just wrote in the chat, not all of our students are going into nursing, PT, OT, etc. Heidi, you're absolutely right. And so I think, again, trying to figure out what are the top 3 or 4 things that students really need to know and be able to do to be successful in the next course is a really important piece of outcomes design in general. And again, taking into account these multiple stakeholders is really important. Other questions about transfer before we move on? Lucas, what do you think is the next most important thing in the chat to talk about?
It looks like there's a lot of discussion around online exams. And I think that's one we can kind of just discuss right away and go through.
And I think Alyssa has been writing into the chat about this as well. And everyone, Alyssa Sells is our e-learning faculty development specialist. And she has a lot of expertise around teaching online and also around the tech. So Alyssa, do you want to say a little bit about what you've been writing into the chat?
Yes, please, because my response was too long to actually put fully into the chat. So yeah, can you hear me okay? Looks like you're nodding, so hopefully you can. All right, so I just got a question from a chemistry faculty, I don't know, a couple days ago. So I actually went through this whole question with this person, and I just wanted to share what I shared with that person, if that's all right. I did start pasting some of it in response to Ben's question about online testing, but my response proved to be a little too long to go fully into the chat, so I was kind of doing it in pieces, and then it got kind of messy. So my response here is just that we need to rethink the style of the exams. The question was about how to prevent cheating. And first, let's just acknowledge cheating's going to happen no matter what modality and no matter what type of quiz. Students are creative, they're resourceful. If they want to cheat, they will find a way to cheat. So the best way to kind of alleviate that is to design a test that makes it either so students don't feel the need to cheat or that it's harder for them to cheat. Now, that doesn't mean that you make the test harder. It just means that you make it more difficult to look up answers and you ask different types of questions. So first, I'd like to throw out the idea of being flexible and being open-minded and creative in your approach to testing. You might need to change some things. I don't know, Jen, how much of this, do you want me to read through this, or do you want me to, I don't want to just hijack this entire conversation.
Well, let's ask folks, would folks prefer to read Alyssa's message in the chat, or is this useful information to the group to hear about just some different approaches to testing in COVID? Oh, Cindy wrote, I would really like to hear.
You'd like to hear? Okay, so basically I'm just going to run through and hit the highlights of the email I sent to the chemistry faculty that I talked to. So the examples are from chemistry because that's how I originally wrote the message, but you could apply it to A&P. So first thing is try to write questions that are more difficult to look up specific answers for. So you could give your students more of a complex type problem that they need to solve rather than something where they just have to look up, oh, is this answer A, B, or C? So again, it's not more difficult questions, it's just less searchable answers. And scenario-based questions work really well for this, where students have to read into a scenario and pick out pieces of that. You can't just go and look up the answer to a scenario-based question super easily, especially if you have written your own scenario-based question. It's not going to be something that a student's going to be able to look up. All right, another suggestion would be to make your exam more engaging by maybe writing it out as a story. And again, my example was about a chemist who had to solve a specific problem using whatever the exam would normally have covered. And then the students would look into the story and look maybe for a flaw in the chemist's approach. Maybe be asked to correct a mistake that they found that the chemist might have made in some sort of process, or to confirm the accuracy of the chemist's solution or process. I'm not a subject matter expert in chemistry, so I know that the example is a little generalized, but the idea I think is solid. And then another idea would be that you could actually write your course in this same way to engage your students in the story, and it could be a method for them to help learn the content as well. And then another idea is to find ways for students to connect with the content so that cheating isn't necessary. So for example, you could use a discussion and have students work in groups or pairs to write test questions. They could give the solution, show their work, and provide helpful tips on how to solve the problems for their classmates. And then you could also ask students to include links or references for somewhere in the course where the related content could be found if people wanted to go and review more on that topic. And then you could actually pull all of those questions and use them as your exam, or you could just take a random collection of them and you could use them as is, or you could adapt the questions using different numbers or processes, so writing similar types of questions, and then allow students to use the discussion board as notes for their exam. And then students could also write practice questions for classmates. So there's this whole idea of getting students more engaged and involved in the content as one way to alleviate the need for cheating. And one thing I would say too is the things that I'm talking to you about here, they don't just apply to online. You could put this in a web enhanced or a hybrid class too. So this is just solid teaching stuff. Students could work together in groups to write the exam, and you could give them very specific parameters, like they must have one question on X, one question on Y, and one question on Z. The group's test and solutions could be used as their exam score. That could just be the end of it, so it's just a group exam rather than an individual exam. Or you could ask the groups to trade tests for practice or trade tests for finding the answers. So one group would be writing an exam for another group, and then you could use the group score as the student score for that. Another option is to consider, is it really that bad that students can look up answers? I mean, we live in an information age, right? So knowing how to find information is really an important skill. So maybe having students work together and find information, make that part of the learning process by having students work in groups or as a class to complete the exam together. So kind of a variation on what we've been talking about. You could also ask them to fill out some sort of a review sheet or use that and be able to use that as notes. And students that take the time to fill out the review sheet, and maybe they get a few extra points for turning it in, and they get extra points on the exam, then those students that have filled out whatever review sheet you've given them, they probably won't feel compelled to cheat because they've already reviewed all the material, and then knowing that they have it there as notes, it just makes the process easier for them. I know I'm talking a lot
Hey,
and
Alyssa,
giving a lot of good ideas.
Alyssa,
I know.
you're doing great. You're doing great. I guess
okay.
The one thing I would just say is I think there's a couple things coming up in the chat that I think it'll be important to address. So one person, and also I guess I'm just thinking for the sake of time too.
Yeah, I know. That's why I asked.
No, you're doing great. You're doing great. I was just wondering if, here's a couple thoughts. One is Lucas, I think, can contextualize some of what you said in an A&P context. I think there's also an issue like Heidi wrote into the chat, recall of facts is part of the course objectives. And Heidi, I think actually, with all due respect, I think it's some schools that is, and that other schools that isn't. So with all due respect, I think that might not be a common outcome. That might be one of the issues within the field. And I guess the other thing I was just going to say is I think we could do a separate session for folks who are interested in testing alternatives or modifications to testing. Lucas, what do you want to add about an A&P context to what Alyssa was just talking about?
Yeah, I think Alyssa has a ton of good ideas that can be used, from scenario-based, physiology, case studies, that kind of stuff, working in groups. There's a ton there that is really useful in the online, I mean, any setting, right? Whether we're face-to-face or online. And then online, it's just learning how to put it into play and use that. There is the part of A&P, which I think Heidi's getting at, is how do we grapple with the idea of like, okay, we need them to know these bones and these markings. And, if a person's going to physical therapy, they need to know bones and muscles and how they interact and attach, insertions, origins, some of those things. And so how do we know, it becomes the idea of like, how do we know they're learning it without testing? And that's part of the thing getting to is do you test? What do those look like online? And what do activities or assessments look like that maybe aren't a traditional test, but still create that same recall, create that same learning long-term? And there's a variety of ways you can do it. The other part that I think is important with a lot of these ideas to think about is, and people could post maybe their student numbers. A lot of us have a lot of students, and there might be some faculty in here that have 150 students this quarter online, and that's a whole different monster in terms of how do you design an efficient class, as well as one that's beneficial for the student and the setting. And so it's kind of having that balance, and that's where you can learn to have a balance of some things that are still your traditional, maybe online test with some proctoring like honor lock, where you have some of that recall, kind of rote memorization, but also maybe some scenario-based questions. Maybe you also have some other activities that are more physiology case study approached, that build in the anatomy. So there's a lot of ways to go about it. I think it would be we could go through each type, and it's a long meeting and conversation. But I think those are things to consider: is the number of students when you're designing these things. I've done it where I've done essay questions only, and I didn't sleep for 12 weeks. So, if you have 140 students and you're grading three big essays every test, you're going to be grading all the time. There's ways to do essay questions and scenario questions where you have pre-created feedback, right? You've already documented all the feedback because you know what students generally miss. And so then you can copy and paste that response back into a student's test so they know what they missed. You can create the answers and suggested information so that after everybody's taken the test, you grade it, but you don't have to give specific feedback to 75 students. You can post that document in Canvas, tell everybody to refer to that, and then have them email you or post questions about that. So there's ways to deal with that efficiency with 148 students. I can't remember who posted it earlier, but they said they had 148 students this quarter.
Right.
I generally have anywhere from 100 to 150. So I think those are things we have to consider. I think that we can create a document that easily kind of goes through all those options and kind of outlines how-tos as well, set those up and benefits and also some, cons of those as well. But HonorLock's a great system for exams. I've been using HonorLock the last 2 years. I know the state board, I think, got an agreement with them for this quarter. HonorLock's a really simple, easy to use monitoring system for online that's been super effective for me in the testing, the traditional testing portion of my anatomy classes that I have.
So Lucas, this is awesome. And I think Alyssa, Lucas, I'm hearing a couple different things. One, for next steps before we move into labs, because I think there's a lot of anxiety around labs.
Yep.
So the first thing I'm hearing is that Alyssa, Jen, and Lucas are going to create some kind of guidelines document for testing and assessment for these kinds of outcomes that Lucas was talking about. And we could also do a separate session just on testing. For now, I think we want to move into labs. And I just want to read a recent comment from Linnea. Linnea, I hope I'm saying your name right. Please correct me if I'm not. But she wrote, "I'm stressed about labs. My course has already started and technically students have already missed, quote, lab time. I'm hoping to get something more interactive than just learn these bone bumps and muscles." That's awesome. I love the way you wrote that. So Lucas, just thinking about that as kind of our first stepping into suggestion for labs, what are you picking up in terms of labs?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are, we've used a lot of different simulations online, but it looks like a lot of people are stressed about the lab portion. How do we create meaningful labs? How do you design activities that are comparable to maybe being in the lab and having that experience? And I think that's almost the question you have to throw out is like, how do I make it the same as the class? Because you can't. And so we have to look at how do we make really meaningful online lab experience? And then, because that'll look different than classroom. But I think everybody's kind of looking at that. A lot of people are like, I'm not doing Labster. I'm not doing different ones. Some people are doing some of those like Visible Body that has a variety of things in it. It's pretty good. It's just expensive. It has some good things. I think it's figuring out how do we replace that normal face-to-face lab time in an online environment, and what does that look like? And I think that's where most of the faculty are maybe struggling. And Sarah just posted Visible Body is free until June 30th. So there's a great resource. Visible Body's got good things to use as well. Are they allowing, maybe Sarah could speak to this with Visible Body, are they allowing you to use, they're probably not allowing like the grading and all that, but it's maybe learning, you can use all the learning interactives?
Can someone speak to that?
I haven't played around with it too much yet because I'm just trying to get my initial stuff set up and then I'll work on like actually crafting the labs, but it looks like they are allowing everything, including like the graded quizzes. It's instructors sign up for a free account, and then basically students come in and they sign up for the free trial, and the free trial is lasting until June 30th now.
Gotcha.
Sarah,
No,
does that seem like a viable option for you, just from your experience?
I took a look through it. It has am I thinking? It has all of the bones, but it doesn't have a lot of the bone markings. It has muscles. I'm not planning on doing practicals, and I'm doing A&P 2. So I'm just not going to do lab practicals for this next quarter. And I am planning to use it as like a basic anatomy. So like instead of going and looking at the models as they would usually do in lab, I'll have them looking at the anatomy on visible body. I did take a look at it in terms of with an eye towards doing muscle and bone practicals, and it doesn't look like it's a good option for practicals. Like it's some basic anatomy, but it's not as detailed or as customizable as I'd want.
Okay.
The thing we would want to think about, and I've toured visible body like with reps and looked at that in the past, and it's got good stuff, is the lost my train of thought, but looking at the student's ability to access internet, and something like visible body might require a little more robust internet at times. I think that would be one concern I would have with using something like that. If anybody has any experience or thoughts around that. And it looks like there's some information in the chat around visible body if people want to read that concerning what is available in it, what it might be good for in terms of using the visible body. There's some other good body, human body stuff out there that's free that you could design stuff around as well. And I think that's the thing as we're dealing with some of these issues and concerns, and Jen kind of mentioned this at the beginning, is it would be really good for us to look at how do we maybe group up or individually kind of go through what's needed in our A&P courses and develop some activities, even if it was using visible body or something, develop some online low-tech labs where we're able to share them amongst each other. So we're not all trying to recreate the wheel, and we're able to put that together to help each other out. You know, if we're looking at bone markings, how do we put together an activity where they're having to analyze bone markings? And maybe that's just a simple Canvas quiz at the end about bone markings. There's really good quizzes on Canvas Commons already that have a lot of those things as well. So I think that's would be a good area for us to really start looking at as well. Hey, Jen, your mic's muted.
Awesome. Before we move into this discussion about, like I would kind of like to, I'd like to spend some time having Lucas show how he's conceiving of the learning outcomes or the end results for students, like what they really need to know and be able to do. Because part of, if we are going to develop shared curriculum, then we have to have some sense of like what the learning outcomes are. Like we have to be on the same page about that. But before that, I guess I'm just wondering, there's a lot happening in the chat. What are the pressing issues, or what do people really need to know about labs that could be answered short term right now? So for example, I'm seeing a question about what are the free alternatives, and I think in our Canvas shell that we could list some free alternatives there. I think that might be a good use of that. But what are some other things around labs that people would really like to make sure that we discuss? And go ahead and type into the chat or speak. I'm enjoying it too when people are speaking. Heidi wrote, just everyone please share everything ASAP. Yes, absolutely. And Heidi, one thing that I can do is when folks, like I can go through this chat and start kind of organizing it. I'm not an instructional designer, but I know enough to be dangerous. One thing I would ask is if everyone could, and this is just the easiest way it is for me, could you type in your email into the chat if you want to be added to a Canvas shell? And then I will get that started ASAP. I'm trying to make an A&P joke. Lucas, is there anything else on the chat that you think we should talk about labs before we go to talking about what things might look like working together?
Well, I think it would be good maybe just, and I think some of them put them in there, but what are just the main, when we talk about lab, because we feel like it's overwhelming, but maybe we could pinpoint the main concerns about the lab environment. what are the main concerns about creating lab activities, or what are the main content issues or skill issues that they're concerned about regarding the labs? And that would link back to learning outcomes, which I think is a good way to look at it.
So one of the questions I have about this is, what would we consider the gold standard? Obviously, we can't have exactly the same type of in-person labs, but what does a good A&P lab look like online? Because that's one of the things that I'm having the most trouble with is sometimes for some of my labs, it just seems like all I have is a video and a worksheet. Other times it's a interactive physiology lab. So like what do I consider something that would be not necessarily equivalent to the in-person experience, but something useful in that terms? Like what should I be aiming for, I guess?
Does anybody have any responses for that? That's a great question. From my perspective, and then people can jump in if they have anything on this. From my perspective, I think both of those things are good to have. I mean, if you think about in the traditional lab environment, you might have people one day working on just studying models and looking at items, and the next day they might be doing a physiology lab, or they might be looking at cadavers. So I think having varieties is okay. And I think the goal, right, is we want them to walk out of the class with a certain level on learning outcomes, right? We want them to have a certain level with skills and a certain level with information. And I think it's about getting them there versus, so it's about what do I design, how do I design it to make that happen? And so it might involve both of those things. It might be a physiology simulation. It might be a clinical case study. It might be a more kind of maybe an inquiry-based look at anatomy or physiology, where they're kind of doing almost what would maybe be like a pre-lab, and then maybe some results they have to look at. So there's a variety of ways you could do it. I don't think there's one perfect gold standard. I think it's, one, you got to create something that's comfortable for you to do, and two, that will work to get your students to that learning outcome. And so I think that's the goal. Heidi, go ahead.
I was going to chime in, and since we all of us teach A&P 1 and 2, we can probably agree that number 1 has a lot of recall and rote memorization, and I don't think there's any way around that. And I think that faculty should be thinking about building quizzes with labels that really recreate that, because as we also know how the brain works, and so there is value for memory formation in doing that rote memorization to get it in so you can access it later when you are a PT. I don't think we should ditch recall. I feel fortunate I'm teaching just part 2. I don't have to deal with people who are still learning how to look at tissue. I feel really lucky about that. And so my goals, I haven't built anything, but my goals are to try to blend histology with clinical or pathology so I can combine them. So maybe I really want my students to know what regular healthy histology looks like, and maybe demonstrate that they know that if I can find good pathology specimens. I've been scouring the web for, say, thyroid cancer. So having them look at thyroid healthy on their own through histolinks, and then maybe being shown a case study where you mix it together. I have lots of ideas. I have no time is the problem. Also, when I normally teach this class person to person, face to face, I blend my lab questions into my regular test day. So they have a regular test and they have about 10 stations on the same day. And I do things like label the adrenal cortex or some part, and part A is label the anatomy. Part B would be which hormone stimulates this region, and then follow up which disease would be created when there's, I think I can probably build those virtually. It's just a lot of work, as we all know. So my comment earlier was, if you already have an awesome virtual microscope zoomer that always works on all platforms, because I have my favorites, but they don't all work for everybody, students, or if you have a good stash of pathology, or if you've built case studies that you wouldn't mind sharing, this would be an awesome time. And if I build something, I will share it. I think we all feel overwhelmed. We have high standards for ourselves, and it feels impossible to create those. So.
Thank you, Heidi. That was
No solutions for anybody, just, yeah.
Heidi?
I think that was great. And I think your example on the adrenal cortex and looking at anatomy, physiology, and maybe a more applied question as well. That was a really good example too that people can look at. Those are good things. Those are a lot of things in my online class as well, as face-to-face. So I think that's a great example for people. So you had a solution mixed into your thoughts there.
And Heidi, I just want to say everything you said was so beautiful, but my favorite was, if I build something, I will share it. And I think that is really how we're going to get through this. So I'm seeing that Linnea is putting some cool ideas into the chat, but I think just what you said about people don't have the time to build it. So even if you kind of outline some of your ideas, maybe we could even get people together to work on them. Alyssa and I both have experience with design charrettes, like just to rapid prototype something. I think there's lots of opportunity here. And also there's something in the chat from Lisa about, thank you for mentioning how overwhelming this is. Thank you.
My favorite histology website is University of Michigan, because the images are ridiculously high quality, and you can zoom, the students can zoom in and out, and it shows you approximate total mag, and it's not labeled, which of course drives students crazy, but best represents a microscope. And so even in regular face-to-face classes, if we're pressed for time, you know, I use it as a secondary or just as a place to review. It needs the flash, whatever that's called, you know, that plugin, which doesn't work well on mobile devices. That's my most favorite. And it's still not password protected. I'm hoping it never changes. I was going to say something. I saw somebody mention something about a blood pressure lab, and I feel really concerned about my students not having a chance to learn the old-fashioned way, the real way to take blood pressure. I know that if they're becoming nurses, they'll learn it later, but so many of my students already throw up their hands and say, oh, it's electronic in my hospital and I don't need to know, and that horrifies me. If you have any great tools for, it sounds like somebody had a listening tool, that would be awesome. I can't send them to Bartell's to take their blood pressure right now, so there's things we won't be able to replicate. We have a cadaver and it's breaking our hearts that we can't share that. And I've also wondered about the heart dissection, which is our students, one of their favorite things. It's a fresh heart that we have. I can't decide if videotaping myself doing it is worth anything. I don't know. You can't replicate the feel, you know, so finding ways to help them see the anatomy at the cell level and try to imagine what the material would be and feel like, how you capture that. It's important, but
yeah,
so many things.
I think too, those are really good. And that University of Michigan one I put on that document that I shared in the chat too, that's one I use a ton too. That's a great microscope for all the things you mentioned, Heidi. And
PhysioX, I saw somebody write about PhysioX, yep. And I just recently started, this last 2 weeks I agree that a lot of them are really clunky. They've gotten a little better. I'm going to be very selective about the ones I use. I'm not just going to blast all out there. And I wonder if any of you have experience with any kind of online lab. I was thinking about letting my students have at least 2 or 3 tries at it, because I, as a teacher, was going too fast and hit the wrong button and deleted all my data and then submitted the wrong thing. And I know what I'm supposed to be doing. And do you do that, Lucas? Do you let them have unlimited tries, or how do you handle all the glitches and the problems they're going to encounter?
Yeah, I use Labster for ours. We started using Labster because when I inherited online anatomy, physiology, and they didn't have any, it's hard, right? They didn't have any physiology labs per se. And so I wanted to add more physiology simulations and activities and different things. So I started using Labster, which a lot of our biology courses use. And so it's set up in a way where they can do it as many times as they want. I can restrict it to a certain amount of times. I try to use it much more for a learning thing. It's low stakes in the class. It's it's all about learning, and they can do it as many times. They can increase their point value. It doesn't have a huge bearing on their grade. It has enough to make it important. And then I use information from those labs in there other assignments and tests and things. But yeah, it gives them an opportunity to do it multiple times. I like Labster because you can't just click through it. If you don't, which can be frustrating for some people, even teachers, because if you don't do it right, it doesn't let you move on. And so you get stuck and you're not sure why you can't move on. Labster has other issues with, what browser are you using? Can you do it on a phone? All those things that you see with a lot of those. But I like having those physiology simulations for that reason, to make them work through material and see it in maybe in a real life setting. Like there's a lot around the cardiovascular and respiratory system that I think is valuable in Labster as well. So yeah, I think having some sort of physiology simulations that they're allowed to work through multiple times is good. I think that's valuable in the learning process.
This is a great discussion, and there's a lot happening in the chat. So one thing, it is 11:46. Lucas, do you want to share with everyone just this brief kind of mock-up of how we might all kind of think around how to get on the same page so we can be sharing materials efficiently?
Yeah, I was thinking that, and I have that document that kind of just outlines the systems, but I thought it would be nice if we were able to, within this group, if people were interested, if we were able to take a system and, yeah, we got it pulled up there. And I just had the learning outcomes, and I just put the systems. I didn't put specific learning outcomes because that can get a little too robust for this document. But I just thought, okay, maybe as a group, we could identify, okay, there's an area that I feel comfortable. Maybe I already have an activity or there's something I can design. And you could point out the key things. Like if we're looking at muscular system, maybe we want them to know, what are the key upper and lower muscles we want, and what's the tissue? What about the tissue we want them to know? Maybe there's an activity I can design, and then I can share with the rest of this group and the state. And if we were able to break out into groups to cover that over the next week or something, or 2 weeks, and design those activities, that would be really beneficial for everybody as a community of practice. We could add to them, we could edit them, and it can continue to grow. And it might be something that involves using other resources. But I think the key would be, is this something people would be interested in doing? And then we can look at how we organize that and get people involved in picking which systems they want to do and designing those activities. And some of those are hyperlinked to just study guide, kind of more detailed learning objective breakdowns that I have. So I just put that on there in case people wanted to see more detail. But any thoughts around that? That would be my idea, is how do we start with that kind of that backwards design approach to creating some virtual environments for our students.
So I've just reposted the link to the chat so folks can check it out. And if folks could write into the chat, like, I'm seeing some people are writing in, that's a great idea. So, or that's a great idea, and I think we should do this. So maybe if folks could just say, or even if you could start typing in like, hey, I've got something good for this system.
Yeah, some people, I mean, that's a great point, Greg repost. Some people already started. Some colleges pushed it off. And I totally understand that. If you're not able to create or adjust, I get it. The other thing, and some of us who have already taught online or have great activities, sharing them already. If we can get them in Canvas Commons, those would be great places. I'm happy to share my entire course. I haven't got it into Canvas Commons yet. Like I said, I would. I'm a little behind. But I'd be happy to give anybody my whole course, and they can edit it, make it better, and send it back. So if you are already teaching, don't feel like you're obligated to jump in and start doing this. You're already in a lot of chaos, just getting started teaching. Yeah. Go ahead, Heidi.
So I have access to the awesome micro shell that Jen and Suzanne and you guys built, some of you already. And I think, like Lucas is saying, we are already maximally slammed, and signing up for some project right now doesn't seem super likely. And so I wonder if when the Canvas shell is born, maybe we all of us just pop in there when we have time or an idea and we could put modules based on systems, you know, or you could even have 241 and 2. And then I know I have a pretty good spinal cord question I asked on my last final, because last quarter ended virtually. And I could just pop it in there versus committing to some larger thing. And then it may just populate over time. Like, I found this great blood pressure link, here it is. And then we could just go and have a repository versus a larger commitment, which would be a great thing for a big, big project. But
Heidi, that's a great idea, and people are loving it. And I also appreciate like the organization of the Canvas shell too. And I can do this as soon as we hang up the phone or the virtual phone. I can build the shell, invite everybody to it, and using Lucas's structure here so we could have a module for 241 with the different systems, and then a module for 242 with the different systems. And then, as you said, people could populate. Oh, and Lucas said he would be happy to organize it. Thanks, Lucas. So this is really great. Other thoughts?
And I put it in the chat. I agree with Heidi. I think a lot of people are very busy, and they're probably going to be creating things along the way as it is. And so if we organize a Canvas space, and I'd be happy to organize it, and then people can start adding to it, and it'd be a great place for people to be able to add and pull from as we move forward.
So given that we have about 9 minutes left, the next steps I'm hearing are that we are creating a joint Canvas space. And if you haven't given me your email for that yet, type it into the chat. So we've got a Canvas space. It's going to be set up in the way that we've just discussed. There's also going to be some kind of guidelines document in there for testing and other like alternatives to testing or assessment techniques in this COVID-19 situation. And possibly there's a follow-up meeting around, and yes, also, sorry, just real quick, Ben wrote, Jay wrote, can colleagues who aren't here today be added? Yes, Jay, I'll make everybody teachers so you can add people. And Sarah's asking, are people interested in sharing lecture videos as well? And I think the other thing that I really want to know from folks is this a group that wants to keep meeting online like this? Like, do you want to have a bi-weekly meeting? Do you want to meet once a month? What would be or do we want to just stay connected via the Canvas shell and folks can reach out to me or Lucas if they want to have another meeting? Okay, so Jay's writing, I would like to meet. So if people could write in like, yes, I would like to meet, and with what kind of frequency? That would also be useful.
I think it would be good too if we plan on meeting and I guess I could help facilitate that, Jen, is before we meet, let's get a list of things maybe we want to talk about. What are the concerns? Because we're all going to deal with different concerns as we move forward. We're going to run into roadblocks. You're going to run into issues, or you're going to see things that worked really, really well. And so it'd be good before every time we meet to have that list to just come in and discuss and deal with. That would be really beneficial, I think, if we're going to continue to meet.
Okay. I'm definitely seeing that people would like to meet, and and also that, like maybe if we had more frequent meetings, people could attend when they want to. I'm also wondering too, if we like Lucas and I have led a couple of these STEM meetings now, and it seems like there's also a lot of interest in how do you set up an online course to foster community, and how do you how do you use the tools of Canvas to foster group work and engagement. So Lucas and I and Alyssa are kind of cooking up some STEM topics that are more general, that wouldn't be necessarily A&P specific. And also, Jay, thank you for pointing out too, and diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. So we could definitely do some deeper work, some deeper dives into that for folks. Okay. Yes, and also we'll share out the chat transcripts. So I will be posting the recorded meeting and the chat and a couple other documents into the Canvas shell. And Alyssa, Lucas, and I will work together to make sure that that space is set up. For now, are folks interested in meeting again this time next week? Like, is this a good day and time? I did notice the Pierce folks, I think, are teaching full-time, so people will be in class. Do we want to say, like, is a 2 p.m. meeting okay, or a 3 p.m. meeting? If people are going back to teaching. Okay, so 2 or 3 p.m. is better. Yeah, I'm wondering if we could do later in the afternoons on a consistent day, and then it's just set and settled. So, okay. Lucas, anything else that you want to add as we wrap up?
I think there was a lot of good information, and I think we have a good plan going forward. I did post in there because there was a lot of people messaged me about my online class. And if anybody has an online class, it's probably better than you think, because we all are judgmental of our own work more than we should be. But if you email me, I'd be glad to add you to my course, as well as I'll put it in Canvas Commons. But sometimes it's nice to be able to just go into a course and not have to download it from Canvas Commons. So if you email me, and I know I might get 50 emails, that's okay. I'll add you to an old A&P course online, and you're welcome to take whatever you want out of there. I'll post my email again here for everyone to see in the chat.
Thank you. And I do want to say too, before we all log off, I want to say thanks to Heidi for reaching out and saying, hey, can we have an A&P group? Because right now there's so much happening. So if individual faculty reach out to me and they're like, let's get something together. So then I suddenly have a real person to design for. So Heidi, thank you for being that real person to design for. And Lucas, thank you for stepping in and facilitating. You're an amazing wealth of resource during this time. Alyssa, thank you for adding your expertise. Is there anything you want to add before we close?
No, just this really exciting work, and we were actually, our team was talking about the labs yesterday, and we did have a discussion about Labster, and we are also concerned about accessibility and inclusion for access to that particular tool. So I think it's great that this group's going to work together to provide some alternatives and share with each other. So
Yeah.
thanks, everybody.
Jonathan wrote big ups to the A&P fam. I love that. All right, everyone, please make sure I have your email address so I can loop you in for all future A&P specific and also STEM events over the next couple months. We are in this together. I really want to be of service to you, and I know you are all working so hard right now, and anything that I can do to kind of help ease the burden, I want to. And so does Alyssa, and so does Lucas. All right, so I'm going to stop recording.